Development. It's a broad word, guys. Development. I mean, a lot of things develop. In fact, I would even say that humans develop throughout their lifespan. You, Martha, I remember you when you were young, and now you have big girl teeth. You lost all your baby teeth, and now it's big girl teeth, and you've developed. And look, out there, the dog tied to that post, that developed from a puppy. What I'm trying to get at here is I have a problem with this sustainable development crowd, okay? Like, I'm sorry. This is all gibberish. It has to do with the Joe Rogan podcast. So I am not a viewer of the Joe Rogan podcast, and I don't completely get it, you know? Like when somebody says, oh, man, I love Joe Rogan. I don't really get it. I'm starting to get it. I get like the vibe of the podcast. I've listened to a little bit of it when I was down in Texas coming back, trying to understand it. But I want to understand it more. And so on the path to understand the Joe Rogan podcast, we're going to be watching the first maybe 10, 15 minutes of the Joe Rogan podcast with Jordan Peterson. Let's start with this first 15 minutes of the Joe Rogan podcast.
Anything that you do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's writing, whether it's doing podcasts, whether it's doing stand-up comedy, I think anything where you have to think and manage like complex ideas and manipulate your language and the way you're speaking and be able to engage in the dance between two people, I think you got to do it all the time. I think if you just do it every now and again, like especially like if you took time off of speaking to people, like if you hadn't talked to anybody.
More of the former. Got you.
In a long time, and then you talk. Have you ever done that? Where you haven't talked to anybody in a long time, then you talk to them? It feels odd. It feels awkward. Because I think there's like a thing where you have to get used to it. You got to get used to it.
Yeah, well, I found that was particularly the case with the podcasts, is that it's hard to do that sporadically.
Yeah.
You also lose that rhythm of preparation because you get it. Well, I did. I'm not sure. How do you prepare for your podcast? Like if you have an author come on.
I usually read their book. It depends
when?
Within like I have 2 books that I'm reading right now that are future people that are coming in February. So they're
a lot ahead.
Yeah, they'll be, well, you know, it's like one of them is a climate change book and it's intense. And so it's requiring a lot of thinking, and then I have to like look at the criticisms of this guy and criticisms of the work, and you know who believes that in 10 years Miami's going to be underwater, who believes that this is probably hyperbole and that it's a gross exaggeration, and the reality is
I don't think anybody's really saying in 10 years Miami's going to be underwater, but
you know, the world sort of always goes through these cycles of change, but human beings are definitely having an effect on it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Why is Jordan Peterson wearing a tuxedo? You could name a few events where maybe I could understand somebody wearing a tuxedo, like going to one of the finest restaurants in the world. Maybe, I guess. I don't know. I don't really like tuxedos. Maybe a wedding. Why the Joe Rogan podcast? He must have like gone to like a fancy dinner before this, right? Or did he like legitimately just put on like a tuxedo to go to the Joe Rogan podcast? Is he like trying to self-actualize success? Like, I don't understand.
But a small effect compared to cows and other things. It's like it's hard to sort out. The climate change.
I studied environmental science in Miami. The resilience professionals down there are taking more of the range of 200 years. I mean, that's of course 200 years is in the future. That depends on like the continuation of current projections as well. Same suit probably. I can't show it because right now I'm showing you guys Spotify, which is why we can only watch 15 minutes of this, by the way. But he just sent me a picture of Kermit the Frog in a suit. So I believe it was a pointed and on-point insult towards our main man, our favorite man, Jordan Peterson.
Change one is a weird one. So
that's because there's no such thing as climate, right? Climate and everything are the same word. And that's what bothers me
I'm
about
sorry,
the
I'm-
climate.
Cows,
Let me go. Wait, what the fuck?
probably hyperbole, and that it's a gross exaggeration. And the reality is, the world sort of always goes through these cycles of change, but human beings are definitely having an effect on it, but a small effect compared to cows and other things. It's like,
Well, when you say a small effect in comparison to cows, for example, who is mass farming the cows and causing that then? Because I'm telling you, like, a bunch of cows just like in a field, an open field, is not the same thing as factory farming cows and the amount of methane that produces in comparison. And that small effect, that small changes of like 1, 2, 3 degrees that people talk about, that what doesn't sound like that much, does have a drastic effect on a lot of regions in the world when it comes to like water crises and the loss of like species that have been with us for forever, and not to mention an economic impact in the trillions. Hell, even the military is making contingency plans and planning for the oncoming effects of climate change. Yeah, I don't know if you would call it small. I mean, numerically, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 degrees doesn't sound like a lot, but when it comes to like upending the finely tuned environment that has been produced on Earth, I mean, it actually does have a decent effect.
like it's hard to sort out. The climate change one is a weird one. So that
Well,
one,
that's because there's no such thing as climate, right? Climate and everything are the same word. And that's what bothers me about the climate change types. It's like, this is something that bothers me about it technically.
Okay, number one, I'm gonna let him finish saying whatever he's about to say, because right now I'm just kind of blown away at the uselessness of what he just said. But the first thing I want to comment on, what the fuck is excuse my French, the climate change types? What does that even mean? Like anyone, like scientists, like climate activists, like Green New Deal people, anyone who believes in climate. What is a climate change type? Because the vast majority of people believe that climate change is real. And there's a very small percent of the population who believe bullshit that it isn't. So I assume that's not what he means. So he must be talking about like scientists of some sort. Or it's just too vague. Somebody just saying he's keeping it intentionally vague. I don't know if he's keeping it intentionally vague, but it's too vague for me to like nail down what he means by it. So it's very similar to the they type word usage.
It's like, well, climate is about everything. So, okay. But your models aren't based on everything. Your models are based on a
Warming.
set number of variables.
Yeah.
So that means you've reduced the variables, which are everything, to that set. Well, how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything? And that's not just a criticism. That's like, if it's about everything, your models aren't right. Because your models do not and cannot model everything.
What do you mean by everything when you say?
Well,
models?
but that's what people who talk about the climate apocalypse claim in some sense. We have to change everything. It's like, everything, eh? Okay, what? And the same with the word environment.
What the fuck is he saying? I'm mostly just confused. Okay, first thing, people who care about climate change don't need you to like literally change everything. There's aspects of our lives that could change to help tackle the climate crisis. Scientific developments that I could also develop to help us tackle. There's a million different things, right? But I don't know. I think he's being a little too literal here when it comes to like you need to change everything. As in, we need to literally scientifically account everything from the environmental impact of like toothbrush like handles all the way to like Exxon's like impact on the environment. I'm so confused at what he's trying to get at here, or if he. And what really gets me is like Joe Rogan, like, huh, yeah, and he's just kind of like nodding along. I've listened to a little bit of the Joe Rogan podcast before, and I don't. Well, I disagree with a lot of Joe Rogan's opinions and like Joe Rogan's like thoughts. I've seen him push back on like weed before with like talking to Steven Crowder. I saw him push back on Dave Rubin when it came to taxes and regulation in the post office. I feel like this is like another area where you would be like, what does that mean, Mr. Peterson? Like this is like a Dave Rubin moment from Joe Rogan right now. Let me listen to a little bit more. Maybe he's gonna say something that makes it click for me.
That word doesn't mean it means so much that it actually doesn't mean anything. Like when you say everything.
Somebody just brought it up. His pushback on Candace Owens was fantastic. Ironically, it was about climate change. Yeah, I actually do remember that.
In a sense, that's meaningless, right? Because
that's something I'll bring up. Like if you look at Candace Owens, Steven Crowder, who was the other guy? I mean, Dave Rubin. Like Joe Rogan will push back on people. He had that Adam knows everything person. He pushed back on him, so he will push back on people. Comparing him to Dave Rubin is just incorrect, right? I don't know if it's a more recent development. I haven't watched as many recent episodes, but he does push back on people. It's just a lot of times he doesn't have the tools to push back on people. Like he doesn't have the tools to push back on like Alex Jones's conspiracy theory, right? Or like a lot of other people's bullshit, and so that's why you don't see it. But like here is just like this just feels like ramblings. Like Jordan Peterson isn't saying anything of import here. Adam ruins everything. Oh yeah, you're right.
Well, what are you pointing to? Well, I'm pointing to everything. Well, what's the difference between the environment and everything? There's no difference. What's the difference between climate and everything? Well, there's no difference. So this is a crisis of everything? It's like, no, it's not. Or if it is, well, if it really is, then we're done because we can't fix everything.
Well,
we have to.
What they mean specifically is the human, what human beings are doing that's causing the earth to warm.
Right. But you have to.
Okay, Joe Rogan's actually putting some pushback here. There we go. Thank you. Because what he's saying here is nonsensical.
Include all these factors in the models to determine that. All these factors. Well, what can you not include? Well, then by deciding what you don't include, you decide which set of variables are cardinal. And you have to make that decision in some sense before you even generate the models.
Well, this is like basic like scientific modeling though. People like scientists have been doing this for years, right? Where people will disagree or not agree on like what should and shouldn't be included in a study as variables. They'll redo studies once they consider new variables that affected a study. And let me say, there are tens of thousands probably at this point of studies on climate change that control for different variables from different angles, that do different types of studies from different institutions with different amount of funding, with different scientists of different levels of experience. Like there have been plenty of studies controlling for all of the variables that you think should be considered when looking at a climate change study. And they all come to relatively in the same area of the conclusion that a global temperature increase caused by human actions when it comes to things like fossil fuel usage, for example, or methane in the cows, for example, is going to cause environmental damage of a large scale that will possibly take millions of lives and also like start like water wars. Like it can start literal water wars and water crises and not to mention refugee crises. If you're somebody who is not a huge fan of immigration, I'm a huge fan of immigration. I want to take in refugees. The amount of refugees that can be produced through global temperature increases is massive. And so I don't know what he means by like being this anal about this. I don't think anybody is suggesting that really at the end of the day, me stepping on a blade of grass is what needs to be accounted for in the climate change study. There are certain factors that you need to take into account and other factors that you could probably ignore because me stepping on said blade of grass is not really going to affect the outcome of the study if he's really being this literal about the word everything. Roserus, thank you so much for the 72. I appreciate it. I'm so confused at why he's being so anal here.
This is a big problem. It's partly, it's not the only reason, but this, There's another.
Not to mention, okay, I Googled it just to be a little Google Andy, right? So if Joe Rogan really wanted to be like really anal here, he could just be like, hey Jamie, can you look up the definition of environment? Because he says it's everything. Oh, it's the complex physical, chemical, and biotic factors that act upon an organism or an ecological community and ultimately determine its form and survival. Wow. That's crazy, man. So I would say that the environment is like our ecological community, which is actually where you get like a lot of the things like chemicals to, you know, make DMT. Have you tried DMT, Mr. Peterson? Like there's like an angle he could go here. I don't know, man. I think Joe is pushing back a little bit here, which I appreciate.
The reason that another problem that bedevils climate modeling too, which is that as you stretch out the models across time, the errors increase radically. And so maybe you can predict out
Are you only 4 minutes in? We're not going to watch the whole thing. I'm just curious about the start.
week or 3 weeks or a month or a year, but the farther out you predict, the more your model's in error. And that's a huge problem.
Wait, what did he say? Sorry, I'm just like I'm still trying to process why he's saying this.
Generate the models. This is a big problem. It's partly, it's not the only reason, but there's another problem that bedevils climate modeling too, which is that as you stretch out the models across time, the errors increase radically.
But that's true of basically all scientific studies that try to predict the future. A great example would be like people who predict population like 100 to 200 years out. Like there's a million different factors they're not going to be able to take into account because things change. Like this is like true about all studies. So okay.
Week or 3 weeks or a month or a year, but the farther out you predict, the more your model's in error. And that's a huge...
Like, yeah, if I was to try to predict what the climate's going to be like 800 years from now, there's no way I'm going to be able to like say that everything that's going on right now is going to be constant for the next 800 years. No changes. And fossil fuel usage or environmental impact to human... Like, of course, like, yeah. I mean, duh.
Problem when you're trying to model over 100 years, because the errors compound just like interest. And so at some point,
like
it's all
interest.
Error. In fact, it's already the case that even if the climate models are right, the error bars are so wide by 100 years out that we'll never be able to measure the effects of the changes we're making now. We'll never know if the changes we're making,
I would like to also say that if like climate change just comes up, or in a discussion, and it was like Jordan who made this a discussion about climate change off the bat after the book was mentioned, right? The fact that like the first thing he wants to mention is, man, I don't like these studies, you know what I'm saying, Mr. Rogan? These studies, I think that might be wrong, and if everything's gonna be affected, then we're doomed anyway. And these climate change types, whatever that means, I guess scientists, why would he go on this rant?
To save the climate.
Like I doubt he doesn't believe climate change isn't happening. Like I assume he knows that it's happening. I just don't understand the purpose of the rant. It just feels like gibberish. I'm not even like angry or like I'm just mostly confused. Somebody just brought up in chat, this is why we use multiple models, all developed with their own methodologies and assess the combined trends. Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. The thing is, if he has a problem with this, a lot of the problems he's having here that he's talking about could be assessed by the fact that you have multiple institutions using multiple methods, using multiple different employees of different experience level, with different scales of funding, looking at different variables, and then retaking the study as they encounter new variables that they didn't look at before. And then they introduce those studies into the world, and those studies then are put under academic scrutiny. And these studies get more and more and more accurate with time as we're able to better control for variables and use better scientific equipment. Hey, you. Yes, you. Right there. You. I am starting a Patreon. I know you guys have been asking for it on the YouTube crowd for a while, since Usually it's just the Twitch people who could support me financially directly, but we're finally making a means for you guys to do so as well. And that's not all. You can support the #1 cyber terrorist, mover and shaker, Vince McMahon of Twitch politics. How? By donating to this Patreon and getting benefits like movie nights, special Discord roles, announcements at the end of the video of how much you have supported this war criminal DylanBurnsTV, and much, much more. Okay, not much more, okay? I only have limited means, but more than that, I can assure you. And if you support the Patreon, you will have my deep-hearted appreciation from the bottoms of my soul that you are truly a mover and shaker. Thanks so much for your Patreon money in advance. I will use it to continue to fund the liberal elitist agenda.
Worked. We can't measure it. The errors are too large 100 years out.
What do you mean by the errors? Like what errors?
Well, prediction error. So, look, imagine that you're going to predict how your life goes.
He's playing contrarian because he knows his audience is full of meatheads that don't believe in it. Comment from Just for Grinds in chat. I don't know if the thing that makes me not accept that is that I saw Joe Rogan go back and forth with Candace Owens on climate change. I know Joe Rogan believes in climate change. And he says here he's trying to do some research on a book about an expert on climate change he's trying to bring on. Unless he's literally just going to bring on somebody who says climate change isn't real, okay? Which, I don't care how much Joe Rogan thinks he's prepared for that conversation, he isn't. The thing about conspiracy theorists, and this is something I need to help a lot of people realize, because this is something I didn't realize, like, when I started, like, trying to, like, engage with people that I disagreed with, is the thing about conspiracy theorists is, a lot of them act purposely with dishonesty, definitely ones that get paid for their work, because if they're getting paid for their work, if their work collapses in front of them, then they're fucked, right? Because then they lose their source of income. But that could be true of basically anyone peddling anything, right? But the more important stuff is that these people work their whole lives to learn how to smear shit on the wall and trick you or convince you. And they've probably heard every argument in the book from a layman, you know? And so, for me, I think that most conspiracy theorists on any topic, if it could be 9/11, the moon landing, climate change, or even something disgusting, like terribly, like the rest of those things are gross, but like Holocaust denial, the vast majority of conspiracy theorists could win debates and engagements with the average layman. Because they spend their whole time researching, a lot of their free time, maybe not all the time, but a decent amount of their life, researching how to tell people that their conspiracy theory is real. And that's a level of commitment that I don't think a lot of other people like have for climate change. Like, I'm not to shit on Joe Rogan here, but I just highly doubt he has the same commitment to climate change or informing people about climate change as somebody who's written books about, say, climate change denial. I'm not saying that's the person he's going to bring on, just throwing it out there.
Okay.
Well, you can kind of do that. No, you kind of know that tomorrow is going to be somewhat like today. Okay, but how much is next year's day going to be like today? Well, somewhat, but less certainly, because you might get sick, for example. And then over a 5-year period, well, there's much more.
Dude, am I just stupid and I'm not getting it? Can somebody in chat please tell me? Because that's a possibility, right? I've not gotten things before. I just don't understand the point of this. I mean, it's one of the biggest issues of modern human history, right? And this, I just don't understand. Like, am I missing something here? Have you got to the point yet? I don't know if there is a point here. I think, well, somebody said he's playing contrarian. I do think to an extent here he's just playing contrarian. That I actually starting to buy more.
More that has to be accounted for. And so the probability that your prediction is correct decreases as you move forward in time. That's why we discount the future, right? So if you ask people, you want $5 now or do you want $5 in a month? They're going to say, well, I want $5 now. Well, you think, well, why is that? Well, if I have it now, it's certain. A month, well, there's a lag in there and anything could happen. And you can play games with people this way. And because people differ in the degree to which they discount the future, because how seriously to take the future is actually a near computationally impossible task to solve. How seriously should I take the future? Well, it depends on how uncertain things are. How uncertain things are they? Well, I don't know. Classic example. There's a chicken, and the farmer goes out every day and feeds the chicken. And the chicken thinks, man, I've got a good friend in this farmer. And then one day it's dinner time, and the chicken...
Then there's a chicken. Okay, so the idea that, well, what about the future? Like, the future's never certain. That is true. The future's never completely certain. But we have a decent amount of evidence from the vast majority of respected scientific institution who's pointing, after years of research and suppression of that research, even from companies that specifically had an interest in covering up said research, like fossil fuel companies, that point to the same conclusion. And I would much rather, and I'm not even saying that this is something that should be entertained, because climate change denial should not be entertained, okay? But let's say for a moment that climate change was completely fake. I would much rather have had our scientists and our government institutions prepare for an ecological and climate disaster and develop green energy, develop new ways of disposing trash and toxic wastes, etc., and be prepared for said ecological disaster that we think is coming, to not be prepared at all and face it with nothing. Because let's say we got prepared and then nothing happened. Okay, you could say, well, we wasted some money. True. We also developed green technology. We also developed new ways of disposing of toxic chemicals and fuels, etc. We possibly built up our nuclear energy system. But I'd rather be prepared than unprepared. I mean, let's say that there is a forecast for, there is an 80 to 90% chance of a hurricane happening in the next month that will destroy all this. Your city should, if they're responsible, prepare for said hurricane, even if there's the slimmest chance that the future's uncertain. You know, the whole earth could blow up tomorrow. We don't know. Well, maybe it's the 10% and it doesn't happen. Even though climate change is 100% undisputable fact at this point, and it's not even comparable to that 10% margin of it not happening. But I'd much rather be prepared than unprepared.
The main course, right? And so the poor chicken used induction to derive certainty. The farmer comes every day. He didn't realize there was a massive flaw in his theory. And one day that flaw reveals itself and everything falls apart.
Well, that makes... This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. Even
Athletic Greens, buddies. Athletic Greens. Oh, boy. Just joined. Why is he dressed like a dickhead? Oh, that's not very nice. I don't know why he's dressed in that. That was the first thing I commented on. I don't know why he's in a suit. That's what's confusing me. That's actually the good Pascal's wager argument. If it's disastrous and we act, we've averted a disaster. If it's not, we have a cleaner and more efficient energy system, better food and transportation, and preserve ecosystem. Yeah, that's the thing. Even if climate change ended up being 100% fake, I would still be happy with making a cleaner and safer environment for everyone. Because we could talk about the effect of fossil fuels on like human health or toxic waste management or any of these other things. Hell, like factory farming, which they were kind of talking about when it came to cows, even though Joe Rogan didn't attribute that to human beings, even though it should be attributed to human beings because we're the ones factory farming the cows. There's a humanitarian issue with that, with how animals are treated in factory farming, and an environmental impact. Somebody brought up in chat, but a lot of factory farming of cows specifically can make actually soil infertile. There's a lot to get into, but I don't want to divert too much from the main topic.
That makes sense when you're talking about chickens and farmers. But
Yeah.
when you're talking about human beings and
So we could
CO2...
play a future. Well, we could play a future.
There you go, Joe. Push back.
discounting game. So this is how this sort of thing is calculated, this discount curve. So I could say, I'll give you $5 an hour or $5 in a week. Which one do you want? And people say $5 in a week. Then I say, okay, I'll give you $5 an hour. I'll give you $10 in a month.
Well, I mean, he has a good point. I'd rather have $5 in a week. I guess climate change isn't real.
It's like, okay. $10 in a month. Okay, I'll give you $5 an hour. I'll give you $750 in 2 weeks. Or I'll give you $50 an hour. I'll give you $500 in 10 years. And so imagine you do that with all sorts of amounts over all sorts of time frames.
Okay.
Then you can compute a discount curve, which is how much people devalue the amount a dollar is worth as it progresses out into the future. And what you generally find is that impulsive people discount the future more heavily. That's actually the definition of impulsive. And you might think, well, the impulsive people are wrong. It's like the ant and the grasshopper. You know, the grasshopper's fiddling all summer and then he starves to death in the winter, and the good old ant who packed away the supplies he's doing fine in the winter. He sacrificed the present to the future, and isn't that sensible? Yeah, it's sensible. You should save. Except
Peterson is a loser. Changed my mind from private trigger happy. Well, he has more money than both of us combined. I don't know. The capitalistic system he's winning. Outside of that, I don't know. I think the red meat stuff is a little weird.
Well, what if it's 1920 in Germany, 1923, let's say, and you're in a period of hyperinflation? It's like grasshopper won because he spent all his money before it became worthless. So should you save or not? The answer is it depends. And then there's a further answer, which is it depends on things that you actually can't predict. And so it's actually a computationally impossible problem to figure out how much to discount the future. It's actually impossible, which is why we vary so much in it. Part of that reason is the magnitude of our prediction error increases the farther out we predict.
Yeah, but the grasshopper and the ant analogy doesn't work because they're based on food. And the food that the ant supplied and stored and stocked away is still good. Inflation doesn't mean jack shit to an ant because they don't deal with currency.
Well,
they
the other way an ant could follow up.
But you know what I'm saying?
Well, fair enough. But I mean, ant colonies also have wars. And so it's just as possible that the ant will store up all this food and another ant colony will move in and that'll be the end of that. And this is a huge problem. Well, you're very unlikely to be robbed and pillaged unless you have wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the ability to store wealth across time to decrease the risk of the catastrophes of future, that's the problem in some sense that civilization set out to solve. How can we stabilize things over a long term enough to make long-term investing a reasonable proposition? Here's a positive spin-off of that. So I worked on the UN committee that wrote the Secretary General's report on sustainable development. I worked on the Canadian subcommittee, to be technically accurate, and I was by no means the head of that. I worked with the team that worked on that, but we edited and wrote.
I'm imagining Mr. Peterson at working on this. One second. Okay. I'm imagining Mr. Peterson working on the subcommittee. 1 second. Okay, so sustainable development, yes. But development, it's a broad word, guys. Development, a lot of things develop. In fact, I would even say that humans develop throughout their lifespan. You, Martha, I remember you when you were young, when you were 5. And now you have big girl teeth. You lost all your baby teeth and now it's big girl teeth and you've developed. And look, out there, the dog tied to that post, that developed from a puppy. So when we say sustainable development, really, you're all sustainably developed, but are we supposed to assist other humans in the development of themselves? No, I believe in the autonomy. I don't believe in that postmodernist nonsense, that Marxist nonsense. And so what I'm trying to get at here is I have a problem with this sustainable development crowd. Okay, like I'm sorry, this is all gibberish.
Wrote and rewrote a fair bit of the document, and so I did a lot of work in the background, learning what I needed to learn to work on that committee with some degree of, what would you say, qualification. I read maybe 200 books on ecological development and economic development, the relationship between the two, and
200 books.
Oh yeah. I was over about a 2-year period, and so, and a lot of it was on oceanic management, because I did realize that one thing we're doing that's extraordinarily stupid on the ecological front is destroying all the marine life within 40 miles of the shores. And all the marine life is within 40 miles of the shores. Like, you think the oceans, they're vast. It's like,
Right.
yeah, but they're empty, except for where the sun can shine to the bottom. And that's the 40 to 200 miles, say, on the coastal shelves. And we've like trawled those bare like 7 times.
Isn't that
It's
wild?
a catastrophe. So, but that was the only real environmental catastrophe that I encountered
He's right here, by the way.
in all that work that I thought was both credible and
He's right about what he's saying about our oceans.
addressable. We know how to fix that. You make marine protected areas like national parks that you need about 15% of the total coastal territory really protected, and that solves that problem essentially. And then everybody has fish, because the fish, they don't just stay there, they move around. You can have your cake and eat it too with marine protected areas. But mostly what I learned, and this was really cool, was that this was so cool, and I really believe it's true. The fastest way to make the planet sustainably green and ecologically viable is to make poor people as rich as possible, as fast as we possibly can. Because the thing about poor people is that, well, first of all, they're not resource efficient. They use a lot of resources to produce very, very little outcome. And so that's a problem. Slash and burn agriculture, for example. But even more importantly, when you're insecure on a day-to-day basis, you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you're not paying attention to the broader environment, that hated word, around you. And you can't even really worry about your children's future in some real sense, because like, no, you don't understand. Lunch is the future. We don't have lunch, we're hungry, and that goes on for like a month, we're dead. That's the future. So what happens, if you can get resources to the poorest section of the population, as soon as they get to the point where they have some hope of a genuine future, especially for their children, they immediately become concerned about broader environmental considerations. And then the attempt to make the environment habitable and sustainable, that comes up of its own accord at a grassroots level and spreads everywhere. And the evidence for that is clear. And so this is one of the things that really bothered me about COP26. So, and that was based in part on this.
What is that?
That was the big climate meeting in the UK just a few months ago. You know, the one where all the COVID rules were suspended so the important people could talk about important things. In any case, I thought if the politicians who were discussing...
Okay, boys. 13 minutes. That's how long it took for COVID to be mentioned. And I think that can be our notice to check out. Like 10% of this was interesting, and it started to get interesting at the end, but the start of this was rocky, man. My God. I'm trying my hardest to understand like the Joe Rogan appeal. And I think the other episode when they were just vibing and talking about Fear Factor was so much more appealing to me on an individual. From like a content perspective, obviously it's not as appealing because I'm a political content creator. But I would never watch this or listen to this on my own time. The Fear Factor discussions, I would actually listen to. Them talking about like bull riding, I would actually listen to that. This, I don't know, man. This felt like a discussion that wasn't necessary and mostly was just rambling while trying to sound smart. And at least Joe Rogan pushed back on it. And so Joe Rogan is pretty cool when you also like the guest he has on, but him with just a random person that you don't particularly care for isn't that great. Dude, him interviewing Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, Jake the Snake Roberts, like those interviews are legendary to me.